You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.
Hi to all our amazing listeners out there of On the Way Home. Today we have a very special guest. We are going to be joined by Daniel Foch, who's the Chief Real Estate Officer at Valery.ca. Daniel brings a lot of very intricate, interesting real estate experience and analysis to his work. And so I thought it would be an interesting conversation. How exciting is this? We have Daniel Foch with us on the show today. I'm going to say that Daniel Foch has probably read more real estate market reports by 9 a.m. than I would have anyways in a month. And so we're really excited to have you on the show with us today, Daniel. Thanks for joining.
Yeah, I'm really happy to be here. I love the work that you're doing, and I'm thrilled to have the opportunity. So thank you.
Daniel, what does home mean to you?
It's a really good question. I think in kind of, not to get like too esoteric or I think for me it's a place where you build your life, right? Like I think we only really have that in life. Like we only, like, it's the one thing that we all get. We get an opportunity to live, and I think that the home is supposed to be the place where you build that, where you create that, whatever it is. It doesn't, for everyone it's different, but you need a physical location to do that. We haven't really transcended that demand yet, right? We haven't been able to innovate that one away. So to me, it is the physical location in which you build your entire life. Like that's what home is. And that could be family, that could be, a job working from home. It could be your garden, a collection of the things that are important to you. It's a place where you gather sleep to rest up for the next day. You eat your meals. That's what home is to me.
Daniel, for those who might not know your work, can you give us a quick intro? How did you get started in real estate? What drives your work today, especially when it comes to affordability and housing policy?
Yeah. I started in a family business when I came out of university. So I did an undergrad at the University of Guelph in real estate and housing. And I'm probably one of the few people in that program who focused on like more the housing portion of it, which was kind of housing market analysis. Everyone else sort of went into commercial real estate space. It's actually just called the real estate program now. But I joined my family business, and that's a small town family real estate team in the Greater Toronto area. And I traded real estate for a couple of years with them. And I really the market was Keswick, Ontario, so Georgina. And so it was very, very popular first-time home buyers market. And in that process, I really started to get in touch with the needs of young people who were like me, who, my age, trying to buy their first home and really, really struggling to do so. It didn't start off too bad. Like I think I got my license in 2014. So 2014, 2015, wasn't too bad. 16, 17, things started to get crazy. And that's when the foreign buyer ban came into play in Ontario, because there was a lot of runaway markets in the GTA especially. And over time, like kind of gradually started working with developers, and I found like a lot of young people really wanted like data to substantiate their decision-making process. To not feel like everything felt so risky and scary. Like we were spending the highest multiple of our income that any 30-year-old had ever spent in Canada, in Canadian history. Our parents were spending like 3x income to buy a house, or like 5x income to buy a house. We were spending 10. And the only real way for me to help people have comfort with that was to mitigate risk, and we did that through data. And so that's kind of what evolved into what I'm doing now. So I started doing research for my first-time homebuyer clients, and that evolved into doing research for developers who wanted to build homes for first-time homebuyers. And now it's doing research for developers who want to build rental properties for people who no longer can buy homes, or because we're seeing a cultural shift away from homeownership into renting. And at the core of that, we started a brokerage called Valery.ca. So I was, I guess I'm not technically a founder, but an early joiner. I was very fortunate to have them reach out to me. They're an AI company, and they're really focused on solving problems for home buyers. And the biggest portion of home buyers in Canada is first-time buyers. Almost 50% of buyers in Canada are first-time buyers. And so we've really, really been focused on solving this affordability problem from a realtor perspective. And that's a very hard place to solve it from, by the way, but that's kind of what we're doing. And then the reason that they reached out to me, and it's probably worth mentioning, and you mentioned this sort of at the beginning, I host Canada's #1 real estate podcast. It's called The Canadian Real Estate Investor. We have about 120,000 monthly listeners. And I think we just hit 3 million downloads in our 300th episode. So been doing that for about 3 years as well. Yeah.
Well, that's awesome. You clearly have a lot of expertise, and I'm wondering if you want to talk a little bit more about your work in terms of you did touch on affordability for first home buyers, and how have you impacted housing policy as well?
Yeah, I mean, on the policy side, like I've worked with governments of all levels, municipal, in the GTA and a couple of other cities around the country. We actually have the city of Toronto coming to one of our upcoming events, which is about multiplex housing. I've been kind of at the forefront of the missing middle conversation, which I'm really grateful to be a part of. But on the brokerage side, like one of the things that we really do is we understand that most people, and even the way that we measure housing affordability in Canada, like it's different than the way that most other countries do. Most other countries, if they're analyzing housing affordability, it's price relative to income. But our price to income is like so severe that we have to come up with our own metrics. And so not to say that other countries don't do this, but the US is probably the only other country that really, really looks at things the same way, which is mortgage payment as a percentage of income. And so we've gotten to the point where we boiled housing down to like a monthly cost rather than a single time price that you pay for something. And not to say that it's the right or wrong way of thinking of it, but Canadians really buy payments. And this has created this kind of debt fueled economy, which is sort of at the core of what we do. And we're really trying to make that super clear to people as early as possible in their home buying decision, which is we take, like when you're browsing for a home, you should know what that mortgage, you shouldn't be finding out the mortgage payment like 3 days before closing when you're having these conversations with your lenders. You should be thinking about it at the onset of your home search or your rental search, right? And we try and really give people, we use AI to do like a lot of research and calculation to give people a really true idea of what the actual burden, the financial burden of either home ownership or renting is. And that is probably the primary way that we're just trying to, it's just to me the slightest shift in the way that we think about property and buying your house. And it's a bit of financial education for people as well. Like so many people, I think, sign up for this liability. Functionally, like a house is a liability for a lot of people. It's something you have to keep paying every month. And that's fine. It kind of gives a good benefit back to Canadians who are historically, if you're just looking at data, this isn't a comment about Canadians from a qualitative perspective, but data would tell us that Canadians aren't exceptionally good at saving money by comparison to other cultures or other countries' data. And we're not exceptionally good at investing money either. And so we really like housing because it does both of those jobs for us. So that's kind of the trade-off, but we want people to understand that that's the trade-off that they're making and that there are other options, that there's nothing inherently wrong with renting either. But you can really only do that if you have the proper financial education. And to me, the stakes are the highest with that financial education around housing because it is the biggest financial decision that most people make in their life other than having children. And it's the biggest portion of monthly income that most people pay away in their life.
We're at a unique time in Canadian housing, which you mentioned, rising rents, high interest rates, and growing demand. From your perspective, what's the biggest misconception people have about the current state of the housing market?
I think that most people and even policymakers in some regard have this misconception that we are underbuilding still. And there's the problem with the way that the real estate supply chain works is that consumers can adapt way quicker than suppliers or providers of housing, because you can't just build a house overnight, and a consumer can change their mind overnight, and a consumer can move in with their family overnight, or consolidate households overnight. Like, those are way easier decisions. So the supply is a lot more or sorry, a lot less flexible than the demand. And this is where things get really interesting. So a year ago, I would say, we were in an environment where it felt like there was perpetual demand for Canadian housing. Population growth was high. We went for 2 years of record population growth, which contributes to increased demand. That's more people who need to consume more houses. The Bank of Canada observed this in their monetary policy report at the beginning of last year, that there's a very, very clear correlation between population growth and rents. And so rents were rising. And then population growth kind of started to taper off organically. This is before policymakers made any changes. So we started to see big drops in international student applications from some of the biggest feeder countries. And we started to see big drops in temporary foreign worker applications. And the reason for this was that the promise, sort of the social contract of those programs had been broken, and that people were not satisfied with the results that they were getting from those, population growth channels. So they would join a Canadian college, and they would pay a lot more tuition than their Canadian peers, and it wouldn't give them good employment prospects, and they would feel like really let down, reasonably so. And so we saw a big drop in international students, similar to temporary foreign workers. The only people with comparable unemployment rates to young people, so people under 35, is newcomers to Canada. And so a lot of people come here with the idea of working, and there's a lot of fraud and other issues going on in that space. But a lot of people came here with the objective of working and getting a good job, and that wasn't exactly what they had hoped either. And so both of those streams started to fall organically, I think, in response to those economic incentives not working. But at the same time, or shortly after that, policymakers also changed those. And some might argue that they were kind of trying to capitalize on that trend and taking credit for it. Some might argue that they realized that the outcomes of it were good, and that they wanted to get more of those outcomes. And so we now have a government that's trying to reduce the temporary or non-permanent resident population from about 7% to 5%. And so rents were rising and had risen, and the cumulative increase in rent is so bad for most people between 2020, like the beginning of the pandemic, when rents dropped, and the last 4 years, that you'd be paying like 50% more today for rent. Maybe not 50, but like 30% more for rent today than you would have been in 2020 for the same unit. And that's a really big drain on the economy, because that's money that people, if you're spending $3,000 rather than $2,000 on rent, that's $1,000 per month, or $12,000 per year, that you can't save or spend at restaurants or other businesses, or start your own. So that has an economic drain on it. But now we're sort of at the point where that demand side is kind of gone. And at the same time, the supply side is really ramping up. CMHC has done a lot of really good work in supply delivery through this program called CMHC MLI Select, which basically allows developers to build housing with 50-year amortizations, up to 95% loan to value mortgages, and the cheapest mortgage rate in the country. And so that has made it compelling to create rental supply. And so I think the biggest misconception now is that the demand tapered off almost instantly, and in many different ways, right? So one is population growth reduced. Two is, roommates are the fastest growing household type in Canada, right? So people who can't afford a $3,000 apartment are now maybe living with three of their friends in a suburban 4-bedroom home, and each paying $1,000 a room rather than $2,000 or $3,000 for a 1-bedroom or studio apartment. Families are moving in together. I think that the results of the census, which I think is scheduled for next year, will probably be very shocking to see how many people are actually co-living or living in multi-generational households. And so that's been reducing demand, because households are getting bigger. We're consuming less square footage per capita, and that's the market just adapting, changing demand. But at the same time, the builders are still they were contemplating and starting projects, launching projects 2 or 3 years ago. And that those projects, because they were started 2 or 3 years ago, they thought that they were building into a market where population growth was 2% per year and rents were at this rate and vacancy rates were at that rate. And now vacancy rates are going up, rents are coming down. And this is new data. So rents are kind of falling off of, and so this is where we're going to be, I think it's going to be a really dynamic market for the next couple of years, in such that a lot of the factors are changing very quickly. And I think that there's a chance that I don't want to say overshot, because I think the outcome is really good, that housing is going to get more affordable very quickly in Canada. Prices are going to fall, rents are going to fall, but there's economic consequences to that, because homeowners' equity gets erased when prices fall, or developers lose money when rents fall. Landlords lose money when rents fall, and it's everyone's just responding to incentives, but that's kind of like the outcome. And so the misconception is that, you have all of these people contributing to the market that are making tons of money, and, they're gonna, have these amazing assets from the rental development thing. And the reality is their margins are very tight, and many of them are just scraping by. And I think everyone is equally trying to contribute to the affordability problem by bringing these projects to market. And I think we need to see that for what it is. Like, we're all trying to make the market better, right?
You've spoken a lot about housing affordability. What are some of the biggest barriers to achieving affordable housing in cities like Toronto, municipalities like York Region, and all across Canada?
I think the biggest one is going to be a zoning thing. I think that the market has made it very clear that it wants urbanization. Like, most people want to live in urban areas. We have 70% of the world's population live in urban areas. It's expected to increase. I think in Canada it's much higher than that, but that's expected to increase to like 80% by 2050 globally. It's not to say that that's the best way to live. I don't live that way, and I'm not trying to say that people need to live in multiplexes or tall condo buildings or whatever, but that's what the economy is saying. And that could be because, single family detached is too expensive or whatever, or it could just be that people like living, like, they don't want to have a big house to take care of, and they want a small unit and be close to everything. We don't really know. You'd have to interview millions and millions of people to find out. But given that the market has communicated that through the economy, which is frankly like the best democratic system that we have in the world, right? People can vote in the way that they allocate their money, or with their feet, right? By moving different places. It's probably far more democratic than, a 2-party or 3-party or 5-party election, where only half the people show up to vote. And given the market has communicated that, we need to make it possible to create the housing that the market demands. And we haven't done that. We have constricted the ability for, especially in the 905, the GTA, for new supply creation, either by tearing down existing older, houses that, the deferred maintenance alone would make it super prohibitive for a young family or a first-time home buyer to take possession of one of these houses, because it's 100 years old and needs a ton of work or whatever it is, and the last owner maybe didn't do a lot of that work. Some of these places, they're on large lots, and they could accommodate 6 units or a handful of townhouses, or a couple of different formats of houses that the younger people actually would prefer. And not to say that we only need to make housing for young people, but young people are disproportionately impacted by this housing affordability challenge. So I think that zoning is probably the biggest hurdle that most municipalities are facing. The next one would be development charges. So a lot of municipal governments charge money. Like, people like to demonize developers and say, oh, developers are so greedy, they're making huge profits. And the truth is that if you look at who makes the money, like who gets the largest share of the purchase price that a homeowner pays, it's the government. The government takes about 31% of the value of a new home in the province of Ontario. And that's through things like HST, development charges. It depends on, it's not one government, right? So there's the federal government gets some money, the provincial government gets some money through HST and land transfer tax. If it's in Toronto, they get development charges and municipal land transfer tax. The developer would make, I would say, like on average, a developer is typically happy making 10% return on a project. And that's, I mean, they're levered, so they don't put a ton of money into the project, so that it's like a pretty big return on their investment. But they also take all of the risk. Like a municipality doesn't stand to lose anything if a project gets canceled. They lose revenue, but they don't risk their reputation. They don't lose any capital that they put into the project, right? So developers take all the risk and make the smallest amount of a return relative to everyone else in the cost structure of housing. And so I think that those are the two big things. Is municipal governments really need to reassess their priorities. If they actually want to get housing built, they need to make it easier for businesses to build housing, and they need to make it cheaper for businesses to build housing. And those improvements to the cost structure will get passed on to the end users. A lot of people say, oh, well, if they reduce development charges by 10%, then the developer's just going to keep the prices the same and capture the spread. But the reality is developers can't sell units at current prices. So I promise they're going to reduce the prices if they have room to reduce the prices. If they could reduce the prices already, they would have, because that's the only way that they're going to sell more units. Everybody thinks that there's some magic marketing tools that we have to convince people to pay more money for stuff. We don't. It's like any other product in the market. The demand for a product is a function of the price. And so if you can make things cheaper, more people will buy it.
So when you're talking about zoning reform or multiplex development, what would you say comes to the top of your list that you believe would make a real dent in housing affordability?
I think that the city of Toronto did a really good job actually with their fourplex program. I wish that they went a little bit further with the sixplex program. Like if the sixplex program looked exactly like the fourplex program, it would be very successful. So in the city of Toronto, you can build a fourplex with as of right. So you go buy any residential lot in the city of Toronto in the 401(6). You can build a fourplex as of right, subject to obviously some architectural constraints that you might need minor variances for, and you pay no development charges. Now you can also add an ADU with no development charges. So that gives you what they're calling a 4+1. And a 4+1 is a fourplex with a garden suite in the back. And the reason why you would do the +1 is because once you have 5 units, you can get CMHC MLI select financing. And so that combination of factors gives you the perfect stack of incentives for a developer to create housing. I would say that it doesn't really need to be more than that. It just needs to exist in more places. It shouldn't just be in the city of Toronto. Like by no means should the densest place in the GTA be the one that's leading the charge in ground-based housing innovation. And some of these other 905 municipalities, they're still stuck in this very disparate housing concept from a zoning perspective, where we have basically McMansions. You've got your large single family homes, and then you've got shoeboxes. So you've got 6,000 square foot house on 3,000 square foot house on a 30-foot 50-foot detached lot, and you've got a 600 square foot 1-bedroom condo or less, right? There's so much housing available in the middles. There's family-sized condos. There's walk-ups where multiple families can live together in a 4-unit building and share, a backyard. And there's a community built around this small housing concept. To me, like the plexes, like small multiplex, is probably the easiest way. And the reason why I would say that is it's really agile. Like if I can buy a piece of land, get my building permits, and build one of those things within a year. And the reason why that's so valuable in today's market is I can respond to the market in as short of a time frame as humanly possible, which removes a lot of that market risk. If I'm a high-rise builder, I have to go buy a piece of land and it takes me 2 years to entitle it, and then it takes me 3 to 5 years to build it. And now I'm 7 years in this project. And we just saw what happens in just a 3-year period if you bought a pre-construction condo in 2021, the market was willing to pay $1,500 a square foot for that, and now the market's willing to pay $950 a square foot for that. If we can reduce that exposure to market risk for market participants, that's a good outcome. But the only way you can do that is by shortening the time frame in which people can create housing, and the only way you can do that is by making housing smaller. It's not to say there's anything wrong with high-rise construction, but it's far more risky, and it just doesn't fit in the current economic setup that we have right now. So we need to be creative about how we solve away those problems and help reduce risk for the developers of housing if we're going to ask them to develop housing for us.
Multiplex development has been a big part of the housing conversation lately. You touched on it. What's your take on its potential? What needs to happen to make it scale effectively across Canada?
I think a lot of the things that need to happen have started or are being contemplated. The problem is they're all caught in bureaucratic limbo that tends to exist in Canada. We've got a standardized drawings system across Canada where municipalities have to allow these things. Like, that's great. That the housing supply catalog, great idea. The sooner we can get that in the hands of municipalities so they can start instantly stamping drawings so builders can build them, amazing. But that was proposed 3 years ago, and I haven't seen one built yet. Similar thing with the city of Toronto. It's like, fourplexes are great, but it doesn't really move the needle that much when they still get caught in this huge back and forth in engineering or planning or architecture at the municipal government. So we need to come to an agreement on what is a housing type that we're able to expedite safely, right? Like, I don't want people getting an engineered drawing of a 70-story concrete building with a bunch of crazy architectural glass things hanging off the side of it, and just saying, oh sure, yeah, the architect stamped it, we're good here, right? But I'm far more comfortable taking that risk with a 3-story building with 4 units in it that it conforms to all the fire things, and it's very easy to underwrite. And especially with tools with AI like today, we should really have made it easier to expedite a lot of these processes now. And that to me is the biggest thing. I hate to say it, because like I know policymakers and government staff, they work really hard. In a lot of cases, they're under-resourced, or they're not responsible for the red tape that's wrapped around the job that they're trying to do. But we need to, unfortunately, everyone else has kind of taken accountability for their role, right? Developers are taking huge haircuts on prices, they're losing money on projects. The federal government has taken a hit on HST. The municipal government, or the provincial government, has taken a hit on HST. There's really only one other person or one other group that is intimately involved in the supply chain of housing that needs to be as equally accountable here. And we're starting to see it, but it's just a really slow process. And the reason is because your municipal governments rely a lot more on votes of homeowners than anyone else. And because, typically your homeowners vote significantly more in municipal elections. And so they are reluctant, I think a little bit more reluctant to make change than some of the other governments who are less attached to it.
So you've advised all levels of government. What role do you believe municipalities, provinces, and the federal government each play in creating a more accessible housing market?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think the federal government, they control the demand curve more than anyone else, which is through population growth. And I think that, I'm pretty happy with the policies that they've done recently to try and temper that growth that has been, perceived by most economists as excessive relative to the infrastructure that we had. I honestly wouldn't have much issue with population growth at 3% if our infrastructure was growing at 3%, but it wasn't, right? It was growing at 0%, or just over. It was a fraction of a percent. So if our housing stock could keep up with all of those things, then that kind of moves down to the next level, which is sort of your provincial government. And the provincial government, at least in the province of Ontario, got pretty aggressive with some proposals in Bill 23, right? So they upzoned every unit in the province of Ontario to 3 units, which is a great start. 3 units, but it has to be 2 separate dwellings. So it's a duplex and a garden suite. Again, not a bad start. Like that's a tripling of existing density. So if everybody built 3 units, that would be great. And, I think CMHC's mortgage consumer survey recently came out, and something like 25% of people want to buy a house with an accessory dwelling in it. So, we will see that become a very mainstream thing. But municipalities pushed back a ton, and municipalities pushed back because they rely on development charges to fund their capital expenditures budget. And if they can't rely on development charges to fund their capital expenditures, then they have to take more capital expenditures out of their OPEX budget. And the way that they collect the primary revenue source that they have for their OPEX budget is property taxes. And any municipal politician knows that they're not going to get elected if they're proposing. I mean, I don't know if you saw, like, Toronto Star estimated, I think they talked to all of the different municipalities of like how much property taxes would need to increase if development charges were stripped away. And like, I live in East Gwillimbury, it was like 100%, right? As a homeowner, that makes me want to barf, because my taxes are going to go from four grand a year to $8 grand a year, or whatever it is. It's a lot of money. But the impact of that means that somebody who's buying a house actually doesn't have to pay. That would save them $25,000, right? Or $30,000. And so it's hard for us to think about society in economic terms where I have to take a loss so that somebody else can benefit, and that's a better thing for the economy. And my loss is 1/10 of the loss that they're already paying. And if we take that loss and spread it out over all of the taxpayers in a municipality, it actually makes far more sense. The burden is very low, is much lower on an individual basis. But it's such a tough sell for municipal government to pitch that to homeowners. And so homeowners in Canada have really benefited from very low property taxes relative to the values of their home for a long time. And the growth of their municipalities, all of the roads and parks and sewers and water and infrastructure and gas lines, all of those things have been funded by development charges, which your home buyers who are buying these brand new houses are paying. And so something needs to change to kind of balance that, because the system it's broken in such that it encodes disparity, right? It benefits people who already own assets, who already have accumulated wealth over years and years of homeownership, and it hurts people who don't own assets and who are buying a house for the first time and now now have to bear the bulk of this burden. So kind of like all the way back to the top, federal government, I think demand curve, really, population growth, immigration policy, et cetera, they've tempered that. So I think that's going to help a lot, honestly, among a couple of other things that they've done. But that's really, to me, their main goal, as well as CMHC, obviously, as a government entity. CMHC has been doing a really good job in getting liquidity into the market, making it possible for developers to have the money to build. Provincial government, I think that they need to hold the municipal governments more accountable, and push a little bit harder in the spirit of the way that they had with Bill 23. And I think municipal governments need to, I think we need more young people and more diversity in general in municipal governments. And I think that that's what's going to lead to more greater and greater accountability. But I'm not super optimistic that just given how young people vote, that we'll get that result anytime soon.
So at Blue Door, we're focused on community housing and serving the communities most vulnerable. We support people experiencing or at risk of homelessness. I'm wondering if you can share with us, how can nonprofits like ours work better with developers, policymakers, or even data platforms like the Habistat that you started to push this agenda forward?
It's a really good question. I mean, I think a big thing is showing people that, like, I think you need to create like a commonality of language, or like a shared context, right? Because it's so easy for people to think about homeowners as like these like wealthy evil people who have so much wealth, but many of them are at risk of losing everything, right? If not more, and the stakes are higher, and the stakes are compounded by debt. And that's consequence of their own actions in many cases, but it's also consequences of a bad system. And I would say on the same on the opposite end of the spectrum, people experiencing homelessness or people who are underhoused. These are things that are the same. They are the exact same like type of problem that happen as a result of the exact same set of bad policies. And it's not to say that policymakers have made clear mistakes here that we can hold them accountable to, but the wherever we can draw lines that everyone wins, right? Those win-win situations, and create, a kind of consensus or shared, shared vision, let's call it, or some sort of unity around the problems that we're all experiencing, the problems and what those are a consequence of. That's where I think that society wins, right? Like if everyone can get together and say, hey, it's clear that this is an issue, can we fix that? Policymakers listen, right? And they listen out of convenience because democracy works exceptionally well when you can satisfy more and more people. So I think that the part that really I find disheartening about being in the space that I'm in and making a lot of content for people that's focused around housing and real estate is that it's very much an us versus them thing. It's everyone is trying to say landlords versus tenants or homeowners versus renters or whatever it is. But the reality is, I mean, we're all Canadians, right? We're all fellow human beings, and we need to the sooner that we can get to a common ground and understand that it's not to say that policymakers are our enemies, because they're humans too, but they are people who are in a customer service job, and their job is to serve us and help us represent our best interests and build a good society and country for us. And it's a lot easier for them to do that if we can agree on what that looks like, rather than demonizing one another and hating one another and creating all of this conflict between one another, and one side is telling them one thing and the other side is telling them the other thing. And so I think that and data is a great way to do that, right? Talking about the number of people who are experiencing financial losses in those experiencing homelessness, those who are underhoused, those who are tenants, those who are owners, telling the same story and explaining, what kind of things that we need to support us, and kind of coming together in that narrative, to me, is probably the most important way, most important thing for us to do as a society is and I will say I do feel kind of hopeful about this, because it seems like Canadians are actually more in agreement on their policies around economics than we've ever been in history. At least based on the last election. It did feel like the last election was really contentious if you just look at your Instagram comments or what, stuff like that. But I don't think that's a really good reflection of the population. I think that the people who are making Instagram comments are probably very impassioned in one direction or another, enough to make an Instagram comment about it. But most people are not impassioned enough, and they kind of fall inside that, closer to the center, right? And they're not going to type in all caps on social media with emojis and all that stuff. What they are going to do is really put thought into, which candidate is actually better, and they're going to use their vote wisely. And I think that both candidates in Canada's most recent election that both set records for the number of percentage of the popular vote that each of those parties had received, were presenting very, very similar economic policies, very similar. And so that tells me that if we had 40% of the population vote for the blue team and 40% of the population vote for the red team, and they had consensus on 5 or 10 different issues, especially around housing, and they arrived at 5 different very clear consensuses around housing, especially, Canadians are in agreement that those are 5 important issues. And so the idea of us coming together isn't actually that extreme. We just need to realize that there are probably more things that we agree on than we disagree on, right?
Love that. You helped to launch Habistat.
Mm-hmm.
Am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Okay, to bring real-time data to stakeholders. How can data be used to guide smarter, faster, more equitable housing decisions across Canada?
Well, I think that the biggest way that data does that is it helps people understand trends, and trends help us to build comfort and remove risk. So if we feel like prices are going to fall, then we might wait to purchase because we feel like we can get a better price in the future. Or if we feel like, a certain type of property is oversupplied or undersupplied, then we might make decisions based on that. To me, that is really the way, like, and maybe an easy example of that is like, we can look at the whole scope of brand new build condos in the city of Toronto and say, hey, there's a good chance we built too many 400 square foot units, and that's not helpful. Let's maybe adapt policy or adapt the economics of our builds so that we're not doing as much of that, because we don't want to be competing in that. And that means that that's less tiny units that are, I would say, the majority of people consuming those can't live a super comfortable life and then end up kind of like in a transitory situation, which isn't a good housing outcome, like for in the grand scheme of things. We use these things to like get an accurate picture of what the economy is, both on the supply and demand side. So what supply are we competing with, and what are the people who are buying or renting these units doing? How are they behaving? Are 2-bedroom rents going up more than 1-bedroom rents? Okay, well, we need to build more 2-bedroom houses so that more, we can have more people consuming more of these 2-bedroom units, as an example. So to me, data is really at the core of just better, less risky decision making, because you're not going based on a guess or your gut. You're going based on real hard data that the economy is communicating through you, through the way that people spend their money. And that's a sensitive thing. When people spend their money, that's important to them. They went to work, they spent a lot of time earning that capital, and so they're a lot more careful about stuff like that than, again, what they post in Instagram comment threads or even voting, right? Because a lot of people just don't show up and vote, but they do show up every day and pay their rent or pay their mortgage.
I want to go back for a minute to what you were talking about with the record high purpose-built rental construction in Canada. What's driving the trend, and do you see it helping with the long-term affordability? You talked a little bit about it kind of throwing off the economy, or do you see it just as meeting investor demand? Could you tell us a little more here?
Yeah, I would say that I'm not necessarily super concerned that it's going to have a negative impact on the economy. Like the way I see it is that the more that we can push housing costs down, the more money that consumers can spend on things in the economy. And so I actually think that the more that we improve housing affordability, the better the economy will be. But in the short term, it is going to hurt some of the people who are in that market, who are building these projects, who maybe underwrote the project assuming that they were going to have 3% vacancy and now have 7% vacancy. That's going to suck for them for a couple of years, and that's fine. But that, these are the risks that you take. It's like, I don't know, it's like a meme out there, but it's like, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own actions, right? But I think a lot of these developers are doing the best that they can with the hand that they were dealt, which is, cheap debt, ripping rental market, a lot of excess demand, and maybe the hand has changed a little bit. So I think that we'll see a flood of supply. I think that the construction of a lot of this supply is good for the economy in such that it's jobs, right? You're hiring planners and architects and builders and framers and, flooring guys and roofers and all of these things that are necessary to create the housing. So that's good for the economy. And then when you're going to deliver the economy or deliver the housing to the market, that excess supply is going to continue to push prices down. And that's a good thing because it puts more money in consumers' pockets. Again, the loss that gets absorbed here is by the developers. And this is why I think that, to tell you the truth, like, we really shouldn't be demonizing developers too much, because a lot of them have lost a lot of money so that people can have houses. And a lot of investors have lost a lot of money so that people can have houses. And so I think that the sooner that we can kind of try to come together and say, hey, we're all trying to do this here. You want to have a house, they want to build a house. Let's try and work together on these things and stop hating each other. That is an important message for me.
And maybe personal clarification, when you talked at one point about first-time home buyers or young people heading into the market and not seeing the type of units that they're after or wanting, are we talking about like single family homes, that there's not enough of those? Or
yeah, I would say that, like, I think most first time home buyers, at least in the Greater Toronto area, have kind of resolved that they likely will not own a detached house as their first home, and so there's a lot of other formats that they can buy, like townhouses or semi-detached, but those are built far less than basically your single family detached, which is pretty high yield for developers, or was. It's not really like anymore because there's no demand because nobody can afford them. And then we have the super high density condo buildings. And I mean, I think condo is shifting a little bit more. Like you're starting to see some more 2-bedroom, like larger family sized condos, and the detached market. A lot of those projects are pivoting more in towards like townhouses or stack towns, which is like basically like a walk up apartment. It's just like, had they done that 3 years ago, we would have been able to deliver more supply to the market who really needs it right now, which is, I would say, those first time home buyers who are most impacted by the housing affordability challenge right now, at least on the ownership side. On the rental side, I think it's a comparable problem, which is, again, there's very small units. Like you basically have, like, if you want to rent something, if you're like closer to the entry level on the price curve, your options are basically a really well located tiny unit, or a really poorly located medium sized unit, or like really the only replacement product for that is like a rooming house, right? Co-living, which is a fine housing format, but that's kind of your spectrum of the entry level right now in the GTA. And so even for a first time renter, right, who's trying to do new household formation, maybe a young couple, they want to rent their first house, or somebody who's maybe just got a new job in a new city that's moving from somewhere else, or leaving their parents' house for the first time. The options are very limited because they can't go rent a 3,000 square foot house for $6,000 a month, and they probably can't rent a 400 square foot condo for $2,000 or even $2,000 a month. And so the only thing that's kind of below that on the entry level thing becomes like a rooming house, which is, a lot of these 4-bedroom houses are actually built with that in mind, right? They have large bedrooms with en suites in every room, so everybody almost gets like a hotel suite, and then they have a shared living space.
I feel like I have a million more questions to ask you, but I can't make this a 2-hour episode. So
fair enough.
I'm going to ask you, if we look ahead 5 to 10 years, if Canada were to get housing right, what would that look like to you? And what would you say now is the first small step we need to take to get there?
Yeah, I mean, I think at the risk of upsetting some people, I think one of the big things that we need to do is be a lot more liberal with the way that we use land in the Greater Toronto area. And I don't think that problem exists as much at a national level. And that's why you see cities like Calgary, as an example, having no issue delivering affordable housing relatively consistently, even against, like, we talk about huge increase in population growth and demand in Toronto. Toronto saw like GTA saw like a 2% population growth. Alberta in 2023, their population grew by 11%, and their housing affordability it went, it got a little bit less affordable, but not like the GTA against 2%. And so why is that? Well, Alberta doesn't have the same land constraints. Vancouver has very credible land constraints, right? They have the American border on one side, they have an ocean on the other side, they have mountains on the other side, and they have protected farmland on the other side. And so there's a box around Vancouver that makes it very hard to build. And so there you have to get a little bit more creative about infill. And I think that's a theme that we can carry across the entire country. We have to get creative about infill, because most builders, the construction cost of concrete, high-rise stuff is too expensive for what the market is able to pay right now. So we need to be able to make smaller concepts more viable from a zoning perspective. And that could be multiplexes. It could be, walk up 4-story buildings, 6-story buildings, whatever it is. So that's probably number one, is make it more viable to build concepts that are smaller than high rise, larger than low rise, aka the missing middle. But number two is we have all of these municipal land boundaries, and then we in the GTA, at least, we have this greenbelt, right? And I know, like, it's really people get very protective of this greenbelt thing, especially with what happened with with the Ford government and all of that. But the reality is that there's a lot of good serviced land that exists in the greenbelt right now. And I think that we need to be thoughtful about the way that we have these conversations. Like the greenbelt was already scheduled for review every 10 years. And this year would have been it. And I know that because I was actually worked in economic development in King Township in 2015 during the last 10-year review of the greenbelt. And this review actually allows them to take land out of like it's fully legislated. It's totally part of the process, completely legal way to take land out of the greenbelt. And several parcels got removed in 2015. If we can be thoughtful and work together as a community to say, hey, this old dried out soybean field that is hard as concrete and isn't really doing anything might, and it has a water and sewer line and a gas line and electricity right at the road, that might actually be better if it was, a affordable housing community there. Okay, we can probably make that concession, right? And then can we add maybe this area that got overlooked in the greenbelt process that is actually, right behind my house in East Gwillimbury, there's an area that it by all means should be provincially significant wetland, should be EP. I go for a walk back there all the time and it's not. And somebody will run into that problem when they go and try and develop it and realize that it's like a swamp and they can't affix anything to the ground. But that would be, that's 12 acres that you can put into the greenbelt that you could exchange for something else. And the net is actually probably more positive because that's actually an ecological beneficial area where some of the greenbelt lands aren't really ecologically beneficial. Again, I'm not talking about, lakes or ponds or anything like that. I'm talking about like abandoned soybean fields or, cover crop areas or whatever, where the replacement value, like from a perspective of like ecological is easy to find somewhere else in the greenbelt. So that's probably my hot take that a lot of people don't like, but I do think that we need a really thoughtful reconsideration and it was a graceful process in 2015. I think 8 sites got pulled out of the greenbelt and nobody heard about it. Very few people, right? And it was because it was all done properly. The problem is it wasn't done properly in the last couple of years, and that upset a lot of people. And here we are, right? So, and now that's a cloud that's hanging over this year. I don't even know if they'll run the greenbelt review process this year because, it's that cloud is hanging over it, and as soon as they I think that they're trying to keep that book closed because it's a political hot potato, right?
True. That was incredibly insightful, Daniel. Before we wrap, is there one piece of advice you'd give to our listeners, housers, advocates, nonprofits, charities like Blue Door, or even everyday Canadians who want to be part of the housing solution? I think, like you said, we've all kind of come to agreement on the fact that we're in a housing crisis and, Canadians work as a team to solve. So is there anything that you would say to our listeners before you go?
Yeah, I think you summarized it very well. I think we need to see each other as equals, that we're all human beings here and we are all dealing with this in different ways. To be honest, I just saw a data point today that baby boomers have the fastest growing household indebtedness since the beginning of the pandemic. And so, even the people that are getting demonized, and I even, like to pick on them the odd time because it feels like easy to do, right? They all have these rich, huge houses and whatever. But the reality is we're all facing this problem and we all need to, the only way that we're going to be able to solve it is together. And so we actually need to come together. The sooner that we can reach a consensus and come to an agreement that this impacts us all and that we need to work on a solution together, the faster that we're going to get out of it.
How can people reach out to you or learn more?
Yeah, you can find me typically on Google, just like my last name's Foch, F-O-C-H. So it's a unique name in Canada. So Google is very friendly to me in that regard. So just search Daniel Foch on Google and usually it'll give you like whatever platform you're most likely to want to find me on. I'm trying to be on everything: YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, X or whatever, Threads, TikTok, all of it. Yeah.
True. I was able to find you pretty easily. So
yeah.
For any of our listeners who'd like to get in touch with Daniel, you can search him up and learn more about his great work. He also puts some really informative stuff out on LinkedIn and other platforms. Thank you so much, Daniel, again, for joining us on the show today.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for having me. It was a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Everyone, that's Daniel Foch, Chief Real Estate Officer at Valery.ca. You got a lot of information there today, and that's a wrap for today's show. I'm Emmy Kelly, and we are on the way home. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to On the Way Home with your host, Emmy Kelly.